G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to bring to you some FAQs, some frequently asked questions, or some frequently asked questions answers. And I'll go from the top of the list. I've made a little list of bits and pieces, so I'll go through that as to what I got here. First one is occasionally, and I've done some videos on it to explain about it, but that's Coriolis. Does it exist? Do we use it? Do we allow for it? Yes, yes, and yes is the answers. But I would say it's a very small deal in this shooting thing. Coriolis is about a rotating sphere. It's not about our rotating Earth and the fact that we're spinning at a different speed to the atmosphere just above us, or all the crazy comments that I hear on that side of things. It is to do with the maths of having something travel across or over the surface, so it's disconnected from the surface but travelling over on a rotating sphere. There is maths on that side of things, and yes, we allow for it. But it is only relevant for the first shot. Once we've seen an impact, then we're using that. We're using that impact as in our reference, and that then no longer is relevant to any other equations. It's not a changing feature, unlike everything else we're dealing with, from air pressure to wind, and basically what the air is doing is the big creature that we're dealing with. There's also light and what it's dealing with, and mirage and that side of things, but wind is the big deal. That's the thing that's changing all the time, and that's what we're allowing for. And in the average shot, the Coriolis that we allow to do something is generally at best 1/10 of the equation, and it's a stable part of the equation. So really, yes, we allow for it, but it's not something that's relevant past trying to get a first shot hit, and there are so many other things that are more relevant that it's not really worth talking too much about. Anyway, that's Coriolis. Next one is single feeding. Why do we single feed? We shoot, basically most of our rifles have magazines in them. Most of them are set up to be able to use with magazines, so they are able to be magazine fed. So why do we single feed? Well, there's a few reasons for that answer. One is personal preference. I prefer to do that because of the style of shooting that we're actually doing. And I suppose that's come about through years of trying all sorts of things and making sense of stuff. There is putting in a magazine to start off with in a shoot where you are shooting extreme long range or long distance, and you're got one shot and then you're waiting a while to see what your impact and shooting again, is you've got time. So you've got time to grab another. I'm sort of do it my way. And you can do it any way you like, but you've got time to unload, put another bullet in and shoot again. And it's a nice steady sort of pace that I like to operate at. So racking and shooting again, yes, it's nice to prove that it works on the systems, and sometimes I use it that way, but there's no real benefit to it. And what I mean by that is that you've got to take your bullets out and put them in a magazine, and then put them in the gun, and then you're racking them, and the moment you've shot more than that magazine has, you're doing that again. So you're giving yourself an extra job rather than staying in your steady cycle of just straight into the rifle. So that's one thing. There's other places where where the length of the loads won't fit in the magazines. That's not all of them. Some I've got magazines that will take the full length loads and that sort of stuff, but there's some that won't fit in there. So there's that side of things. There's also, and I suppose a pretty big deal, is the actual brass and your bullets. One is when you put brass on top of brass and you're sliding over the top, you're going to get the scruff mark as that bullet comes out and slides out and goes, whether it's sliding across the steel lip on the magazine or it's sliding across the brass below it. There's little rub marks that show up on there. Not much, but if you're looking after your brass, that's sort of a little negative, but doesn't really matter to anything in a structural sense. What does matter, but, is that when you actually rack a bolt, a bullet out of a magazine, the tip of that bullet is a nice sharp thing that is supposed to stay pristine. It is the bit that is out there on the front of that expedition over to the target. It is the bit that you want as nice as possible. When you actually rack them out of a magazine, they slide up your feed ramp. So that bullet touches there, some less, some more, but in most situations that bullet then is actually sliding up and rubbing a little bit. Now largely it causes very little damage, but there is a little bit of a mark on there. And I personally would like my bullet to be in the best possible condition just prior to the arrival to target. So that means that damage on the tip is something I prefer not to have. So by single feeding, I can put the bullet in there, drop it in, it goes straight in, it doesn't have to rub against anything. That tip is in as nice as it can be. And I suppose the last thing would go with it is that, as I started the conversation, because it is largely ELR shooting is what I'm doing, there is from 2 seconds to 15 seconds of time between what's going on, between when I fire and have to fire again. So to me, a bit of the process, just racking, I don't need to do that. But, you know, I'm looking at, I prefer to take my brass out and actually have the opportunity to inspect it. I put it away, that type of thing, so I'm actually checking after it, but I'm also pulling my bullet out and checking it as it goes in there. All happening very automatically, but I have the time. And as much as anything, like I said, it's that rhythm. There's a fair bit going on with doing a shot. In the long shot, there's a fair bit you're thinking about and going through that process. So that simple rhythm of pulling the bullet out, putting the next one in, and being able to keep that rhythm, not having to stop and reload a magazine or any of that sort of stuff, really works for me. That's single feeding. So next thing in the same sort of place is the fast shooting rate you'll quite commonly see us get into. For some of these extreme long shots, well, all sorts of shots actually, you'll see a reasonably high shooting rate. In the closer stuff, yes, we'll be running a magazine and racking really fast, but even in our long stuff, 1,000 metres, 1,000 yards out to wherever it goes out to for our staff, is I can run a fairly high shooting rate, fairly high firing rate. Now the reason for that is very much about the fact, as I started with in the Coriolis conversation, is that the weather is your big nemesis out there. It's the bit that you're fighting with. And what I've found over years of doing things is that there will be patterns you're working out in what the weather's doing. Which makes sense if you look at how a river flows, or you look at how trees blow, or you look at that sort of stuff, you'll start to see that there tends to be a cycle. Like most things in life, there's a cycle and there's a rhythm to that cycle, so you can start to sort of figure that out. You'll also tend to find there's patches where, in amongst all those cycles, without figuring out, there's patches where it stays the same. So what I've found in the way of shooting is that when you start to work your way in, if you take a long time between shots, you'll find that your conditions are changing between your shots. So that becomes an impossible task. You're just relying on luck to get you there if you don't know exactly what those conditions are doing. Because you can't actually see wind in the middle of that range, yes, you can't see wind in the middle of that range. You might have trees, you might have flags, you might have all sorts of things. But when your bullet is travelling to 1, 2, or 3, or 400 feet in the air, depending on how far you're shooting, up there isn't any flags, and that wind is different up there. So what you really have to tell you what the conditions are doing is your last shot. The further your shot is away from that last shot, the less information you've actually got from there. And you'll still get caught out, you'll still get sudden gusts and things like that change that equation. But largely, if you keep what I've found, if I keep in a fairly strong rhythm and get to, there's two things happening. One is I'm learning what those conditions are telling me. I'm learning how stable things are, I'm learning what's going on, I'm starting to see what's actually happening. But the other thing is I'm planning for, hoping for that spot where everything is stable, that spot where it settles down to this spot. It doesn't stop. It may be the higher point in wind. It may be the lower point in wind. It may be the wind is in one direction. It may be where all the winds line up. It may just be luck where all the winds line up in different fashions but give you the same result. What it really comes into is a point that where you'll get to, okay, that shot was there, that shot was there, now I can start to move it and start to see the adjustments for my corrections and then walk it in on target. And that might be as simple as by having a high shooting rate right to start off with. Shoot, just miss, shoot, closer, shoot, hit. Through you've got that stable shooting conditions and you've used them. And it may be that, and we've certainly been there where we will be 25 shots into this, and it's been all over the place, but what I'm actually recording in my head is what's been going on. I'm starting to find that rhythm, and then with that information of those 25 shots, then it only takes 3 shots from there and I'm on to target. And then that conversation gets a lot more complicated, but my deal is, what my comment is, that fairly high rate gives you what's going on with the conditions. As long as you're paying attention to what's going on and making sense of it, that's how you get to read those extreme conditions, those extreme range conditions. And it is way, way, way more important, those conditions, than all the other features going on. In my experience, from your barrel heating up to your conditions you're dealing with the rifle side of things, the load you're running, that sort of stuff, you need to make it work in there, but reading those conditions is what lets this stuff happen. And that moves into the last of this FAQ conversation, and that is tumbling bullets. Bullets that tumble. Lots of questions, quite common to get I'm surprised, I'm amazed, how is it possible those bullets aren't tumbling away out there? And generally we're talking where we're shooting 1 mile, or we're shooting 2Ks or 3Ks or 5Ks or whatever it is. Generally it'll be too far for what people think that bullet can go. It will always be in our ELR stuff where the bullet has gone through that transonic zone, that mystical transonic zone where everything tumbles and all falls to pieces. And we don't have that problem. Well, the truth of it is we don't have that problem. And no, we don't use amazing special bullets, and I suppose as much as I have seen some tumbling bullets, it's in extreme circumstances, and there are reasons for it to a degree, but largely we don't see it. And that's including big old trucks of, the 45-70 bullets shot out at 1,800 yards, that sort of stuff. We're not seeing tumbling. And there's a few bits of logic to go with this, and I'll go through it. It's a little bit complicated, but I'll go through the couple of different ways of talking about that, or of explaining that. One is bullet twist, the actual spin of the bullet. People consider that when the bullet is fired, that it goes through this transonic zone, and then the bullet is down to lower stability, and that's when it's going to have problems because it's going to get hit by the shock waves that goes through the transonic zone, and that's going to cause the bullet then to tumble and fall over and go crazy. And yes, there are cases where that sort of thing has happened. What we're really talking about is something that is on the edge of stability already for it to actually cause that bigger deal. And that is because, to start off with, if you have a bullet that is spinning at, let's say, an average sort of spin rate for a bullet around the 200,000 RPM is sort of how fast the bullet is spinning. Yeah, they're spinning really fast. You do the maths on your twist and your muzzle velocity, and you can figure that out pretty simply. But one of the deals with that is that spin rate doesn't change very much. And I'd like to, at some stage or other, do high-speed cameras and actually prove all that. But there's a simple engineering to this process. When you have a bullet travelling through the air and it's pushing through the air, there is a lot of air telling it to stop going forward. So slowing down is very much what a bullet does, because it's actually being slowed down by the fact that it's pushing through the air, which is causing friction. The fact the bullet curves the ground, that's really obvious too. We've got gravity pushing down on it. So it's actually gravity pushing down on this thing, making it go to the ground. So that's obvious as well. The wind side of thing affects where it pushes left and right and that sort of stuff. But when you have this little thing spinning really fast, there's almost nothing rubbing on the side of it. It has its sonic cone protecting it to a degree to start off with, but it's only a little tiny surface. There's not a lot of traction it has to stop that rotation. So there's not much actually slowing it down in the way of its rotation. So even though the bullet might have slowed to 1/10 of its speed in the way of its forward momentum, it's still spinning really fast. So that means it's still very gyroscopically stable. So bullets tumbling are more likely to happen because they were on the edge of tumbling already than actually tumbling out there. Not saying it doesn't happen, it does happen in cases, but like I said, that's one of the things that's going on with a bullet and why they're actually quite stable out there. The bullets we largely shoot are the VLDs and the hybrids and all the good Spitzer-style boat-tail bullets made for good long-range shooting. And we've shot things down as small as the 75 grains in the 223 to the 900 grains in the 50 BMG, and everything in between. When bullets get too long and too pushing the boundaries, yes, I've seen some issues, and there's some other funny shapes that I've seen some issues, but largely a good, sensible bullet, especially a lead core bullet, tend to not have problems. So why do people think they do have problems? What is the deal here? Yes, there is the maths of this sonic shock wave that happens out there as it goes back through the transonic zone. So yes, that's real. What is the other part of the equation that's actually happening? Well, actually, if you listen to this conversation, I've sort of been talking about it. What the big deal is, the really big thing that actually happens is that when you're shooting at extreme long range, the conditions have a lot of control. So where you might be able to take 90 seconds, a minute, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes between your group shot with at 100 yards, or even at 300 yards, you might be able to take a long time and make it happen, then it's not the same. So there's another, I should clarify that. It means that you can, by taking a little bit longer, your conditions have changed. The wind has come through and it's moved. And it only takes, if you do a maths, take your app out, take your charts out, do some maths on moving your mile an hour by 1 mile per hour at 1 mile. How much did that bullet move? Yeah, all of a sudden you miss the target you're aiming for. So if you take where your wind is either moving or, and to be truthful, it's always moving, even when there's no wind, and in some cases light wind is the absolute worst stuff to shoot in because you have no clue what's actually happening, but it's still there. It's very, there's still a range of wind around the place. And it doesn't take much wind to affect the bullet, especially out there, especially 2/3 through the range of that shot where your bullet is at maximum height into wind you can't see whatsoever. It's slowed down to where it's gone slower than the speed of sound. It's gone through that sonic shockwave for sure, but the bigger deal is the fact the conditions have changed. So people seeing a 1 or 2 or 3 MOA group out at the 1 mile or 2 miles or 2,000 yards is probably a pretty common place for people to start to really have problems. It's not the fact the bullet has lost stability, it's the fact that you're not able to read the conditions and where you're shooting is causing issues for the conditions are changing. There's also lots of other things. There's light that affects things. There's mirage is the absolute killer. People who think they can see things but they've got slight mirage. If you put slight mirage down at your end, where you're shooting from your area, then a slight piece of mirage can be a 5 MOA movement out at target. But I suppose enough preaching about what it is. It's lots of different things can cause it. What I've found is that bullet tumbling isn't an issue for us. It's uncommon. It can happen, but we're right on the edge of a stability in some form or other. And there's stability factors and all that side of things. I tend to prefer to shoot and see, and actually see how it works. And if this thing groups well at 100 yards, first job done. If it groups well at 1,000 yards or 600 yards, then listen, the bullet's stable, it's doing the right things. It's unlikely to have issues out there unless you're in one of those weird ones. So listen, I suppose those are the FAQs that I've got there. Like I said, they're all sort of working together. The Coriolis side of things, not a factor unless for the first shot. Other than that, it's not a moving thing and really not something to concern yourself with. You would shoot just as well if you completely ignored it, probably in the ELR stuff, because your first shot is more likely to be more away than what Coriolis made it by just the fact that reading the conditions is almost impossible. Single feeding, I prefer to do it, but there's the rhythm thing, there's the looking after stuff, there's the way I prefer, but it's really as much about anything about not damaging the tip on the bullet, so making sure that that's really nice. The fast shooting rate and the tumbling come right in alongside with each other. The fast shooting rate is so I can use that last bullet to get those conditions to make sense of things, and if I get my job right, I can get that pattern to make it work, which is why I can get the likes of 6.5 Creedmoor to hit something at 3,000 yards. It's a stupid shot. Why would you do it? Okay, I hear you. But the way I make it happen is by reading those conditions and following through to where I can find that pattern that's working, that rhythm that's working, and get myself on target. Some people might say that that's just shooting them out there and see where it lands. Yeah, listen, no. And even with the likes of a 22 at 500 yards, and obviously we've shot further, but recently with our series getting onto that plate at 500 yards, yes, there is some erraticness, almost always in the area we're shooting by the wind, but almost always I use those same skills, that same learned thing to figure out where it's going, find that patch, get on there, and then I can hit it. Anyway, that's my little take on those frequently asked questions. Hope that's of some help to people. Let us know any comments or questions you have. Put them in the comments below. Thanks for checking in on us. We'll catch you next time.